Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Monday, January 17th, 2022, Martin Luther King Day. And if you would like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. You'll get a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left, and you just click on the map and you'll get forecast, watches, warnings, and advisory. Much more information, especially if you're curious on checking out where maybe some friends and family live in other parts of the country. Well, today is the full wolf moon of January. It actually occurred this afternoon. You'll be able to see it if there's some breaks in the cloud cover this evening. And we're going to be watching a cold front that stalls out through the Yukon Valley and becomes stationary. And along this front from the southwest through northeast interior, we'll see areas of light snow Monday into early Wednesday. Meanwhile, a winter storm watch has been issued for portions of the northern panhandle on Wednesday, as another surge of moisture will be coming up out of the North Pacific into the Gulf, and I'll highlight that more because it looks like there could also be an atmospheric river event, some deeper moisture coming along late in the week and over the weekend, especially Friday and Sunday. Still looks like we have above normal temperatures and precipitation through the end of the month, especially centered on south central up into the central interior portions of the state. Right now we have overnight tonight into 6 a.m. Tuesday morning, winter weather advisories for cold wind chills and blowing snow along portions of the west coast, including Wales on up through Shishimarath, Kivalina on up to Point Hope, and then a wind chill advisory for St. Lawrence Island as well. In the Panhandle, the Juneau Forecast Office just recently issued a winter storm watch for Wednesday morning through late Wednesday night. And they expect a period of heavier snow to fall there on Wednesday evening. 4 to 8 inches of snow is possible before it mixes with and changes to rain later Wednesday night into Thursday morning. And as I mentioned, there's going to be another push, perhaps a more significant push of moisture later in the week into the upcoming weekend. Looking at the webcams from across the state of interest, up there on the south slopes of the Brooks Range, cold foot, cloudy skies, some light snow, temperature only 2 above early this afternoon. Meanwhile, Gustavus has enjoyed some sunshine, the Panhandle getting a break before the next winter storm that'll arrive on Wednesday. Mostly sunny this afternoon with temperatures a bit above freezing there. And a beautiful shot of the December almost full moon there from Nome. And the full moon of January is called the Wolf Moon. And that is the current moon now that is full. It'll be visible in the sky this evening if we can get some breaks in the cloud cover or the clouds are thin enough. And again, across the Panhandle, there's been some clearing today thanks to offshore flow. But back up to the north, you see a curl in the clouds along the Arctic coast around Utqiagvik. That's a weak area of low pressure with a trailing front. It's moving through the northern parts of the state and on into the Seward Peninsula. Back further west, we have a couple of weakening frontal boundaries up through the lower Bering north of the Aleutian chain, with a couple other areas of low pressure south and southwest of the Aleutian. It's going to fling another trough of low pressure up that way and keep some showers going here through the early week. So there's that front this afternoon approaching the Yukon River. That's going to stall out though as we go through the next couple of days. Weak high pressure over the northern Gulf will eventually give way to low pressure lifting out of the North Pacific. And overnight, early Tuesday morning, we see that front stalling up along the Yukon River up toward the Alcan border. By Tuesday afternoon, areas of light snow will be falling along that front through the central interior with 1 to 3 inches of snow possible. And then you can see that low creeping up out of the North Pacific, heading northeastward. That's going to send a burst of heavier snow across, especially the northern Panhandle, Wednesday into Wednesday night. And then eventually, as warmer air works its way northward, we'll see that precipitation over the Panhandle mixed with and change to rain, especially along the outer coast. Meanwhile, that front will stay stalled across the interior. And looking at low temperatures Tuesday morning, below freezing there in the Panhandle. Also temperatures single digits above and below zero across the south central interior. High temperatures Tuesday afternoon should get back up close to freezing across the inner channels of the Panhandle. Upper 30s along the outer coast. Temperatures generally in the 20s to near 30 degrees, but we could see a 40-degree reading there at Kodiak. Wednesday morning lows 20s across the Panhandle, and generally single digits and teens across much of the south central areas, with the exception of 30s, 20s to near 30s along the coast. And then Wednesday afternoon, we should get temperatures back up into the 30s with some lower 40s along the outer coast of the Panhandle. Temperatures back up into the 30s along the Seward Coast, and 41 there at Kodiak. And then across the north, coldest temperatures, the 20s below zero. That's where the coldest air will reside the next couple of days along the north slope and the western Seward Peninsula. And then Tuesday afternoon, sub-zero readings, especially north of the Yukon River. And again, temperatures Wednesday morning getting down into the 20s, some 30s below there. North slope, Brooks Range down in through the west central interior, including the Seward Peninsula. And then temperatures on Wednesday will remain below zero along and north of the Yukon River again, and south of the Alaska Ranges will you find temperatures not quite as cold. Across the southwest interior, lows overnight will be near or below zero. Teens along the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, and readings generally above freezing across much of the Alaska Peninsula out through the Aleutians. Tuesday afternoon highs will moderate in the lower Kuskokwim River Basin, but come down there along the lower middle Yukon Valley, and temperatures above freezing across the Alaska Peninsula with some 40-degree readings from Kodiak down around Dutch Harbor. And Wednesday morning lows will be coldest up there toward Eamonnok, 8 below, as well as along the middle Yukon River Valley, but temperatures a little warmer again as you go further south and west. Well, and temperatures Wednesday afternoon will be warmest from the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island south and westward, with highs generally in the upper 30s to lower 40s. So looking ahead here, January 23rd to the 27th, 6 to 10 day temperature outlook is showing much above normal temperatures, a very high probability across the southern parts of the state, nudging all the way up to the Arctic coast. And as we go into January 25th through the 31st, that above normal temperatures continuing across much of the state. This is reflected whenever it's warm like that, when we expect that kind of warm up across Alaska, it turns cold across the eastern U.S. And this is the same temperature outlook for the time frame I'm showing you, showing that the Great Lakes down into the Carolinas, the southeast U.S. will see below to much below normal temperatures there. So that's often the give and take that happens with the ridge that's over Alaska and then the deeper, colder trough over the eastern U.S. And here is the precipitation outlook for the same period, 6 to 10 day for January 23rd through the 27th. Above normal precipitation, we're going to get a mild and a moist flow of air coming in off the North Pacific and Gulf of Alaska, so that's going to mean the potential for some additional snow, maybe a mix along the coast, but certainly as that warmer air goes into the interior, it translates to a greater likelihood of above normal snowfall from south central areas up through the central interior up to the Brooks Range, and that trend continues through the end of the month, with generally across the state precipitation will likely average above normal across the mainland.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, here's your aviation weather if you are planning a flight Tuesday into Wednesday. And as we go into early this week, low pressure will reside along the Arctic coast vicinity of Utqiagvik. It's a weak one with high pressure either side of it over eastern Russia and then out over back toward Great Bear Lake in northwest Canada. And as we look out down toward the south and west, we'll see some IFR conditions around Kodiak Island, the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, into the central Bering and central portions of the Aleutian, as a result of a couple of weakening frontal systems or troughs that have lifted northward into that area. Also, IFR conditions Tuesday morning will persist along portions of the north slope and south side of the Brooks Range, especially north of the Yukon River. Tuesday afternoon, we'll still see some pockets of IRF along the central Brooks Range, north of the central areas of the interior, north of the Yukon River, and up along the northwest coast. IFR creeping northward along the Kenai, eastern Kenai Peninsula, back through Kodiak Island, southwest coast, and the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, extending back through much of the Aleutian chain, but at least Tuesday, still see VFR across much of the Panhandle along the Alcan border. That'll be changing though on Wednesday. Low pressure will be lifting northward out of the North Pacific into the Gulf of Alaska with another surge of moisture that will spread more snow and rain across the Panhandle as we go through the day, Wednesday into Wednesday night. And we expect with that push of moisture northward, even there across the central interior along the Yukon River, we'll see areas of IFR break out with more widespread IFR. Kenai Peninsula across Cook Inlet down through Kodiak Island, much of the southwest, and back through the Aleutian chain. By Wednesday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions to become widespread throughout the Panhandle up into the northern Gulf Coast, and areas of IFR continuing along the Yukon River, extending back into the southwest and out over the Bering into the western half of the Aleutians. Pass conditions on Tuesday, Anaktuvuk Pass, we'll see IFR conditions there hold throughout the day, as will Adigan Pass. And then as we go further south and west, there may be a very brief period of VFR conditions early Tuesday morning, especially down toward Lake Clark, but otherwise becoming MVFR as we go through the day. And we'll see VFR conditions become MVFR at Rainy Pass, continuing around the central Alaska range. Windy Pass will go from VFR to MVFR, with MVFR conditions definitely south of the pass and VFR conditions the farther north you fly of the pass. Isabel will hold on to VFR conditions, as will Mentasta Pass. And then as we go south and west, Tanita, VFR conditions early in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. And by and large, Portage will have MVFR conditions throughout the day on Tuesday, though if you fly further west of the west entrance, look for VFR conditions to hold. And Chilkoot and White on Tuesday will at least have one more VFR day, as will much of the Panhandle, though conditions will be deteriorating to IFR on Wednesday. And looking at freezing levels, the surface freezing line extends from just off the British Columbia coast between Haida Gwaii and the south end of the Panhandle out over the northern Gulf, and then south of Kodiak Island across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula out into the central Bering. And freezing levels do briefly come up to around 2,000 feet in the vicinity of the central and eastern Aleutians. Icing, nothing too terribly heavy, but there could be some isolated moderate icing along the Alcan border, Yukon Flats between 2,000 and 9,000 feet. And then back to the west across the northern and central Bering Sea between 2,000 and 10,000 feet, and then an area between 6,000 and 14,000 feet over the southwest Alaska Peninsula, lower Cook Inlet, and Kodiak Island. Upper level jet stream winds not that impressive, generally 60 to 70 knots from the southwest across the central interior and out over the Gulf. And then as we get down to 9,000 feet mid-levels, weak circulation of low pressure there up toward the Arctic coast, as well as out in the southwest Gulf, North Pacific interface, with some stronger winds out over the central western Aleutians of 50 to 60 knots. And coming down to 3,000 feet, we see that low pressure will be approaching the southwest Gulf with a broader area of 40 to 50 knot southeast to south winds entering the lower Gulf, and an area of stronger winds from portions of the central Aleutians back into the western Aleutians out of the east-southeast 50 to 60 knots, and this will translate to turbulence, perhaps isolated severe turbulence in the vicinity of the central Aleutians around Adak, Atka, and then westward toward Shimia between the surface and 3,000 feet.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations, and you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes, and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad. And this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch. And I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRa's. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoras.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRa's. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and now in our marine weather segment with the sea ice edge. The ice has continued to press off toward the west and southwest as we were expecting here early in the week. It's now past St. Matthew Island, approaching St. Paul from the northwest, at least the leading edge. And this will be the trend here in the next couple of days as winds continue off the mainland, generally out of the northeast. And looking at the southeast, including the panhandle here for Tuesday, winds will be somewhat variable, northeast across the central northern inner channels, 10 knots, waves a couple feet. Southeasterly there down toward Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Generally southeast winds 15 to 20 knots on the outer coast with waves 5-6 feet. But we're going to have another low pressure system lift out of the North Pacific on Wednesday, spreading heavier snow, changing to rain by Thursday across especially the northern parts of the panhandle. And winds will be out of the north, Petersburg up toward Juneau and Skagway, 20-25 knots with gust higher to 35 knots and waves running about 4 feet. The outer coast, look for southeast to east winds upwards to 40-knot gales and waves from around 10 to as high as 15 feet. And then along the northwest Gulf Coast, winds will be generally out of the east, 20 knots off of the Kenai Peninsula, waves running 5 feet, but northeasterly 15 knots, 3-footers there in Prince William Sound, and north to northeast winds 25 up to 30 knots there southwest of Homer, mouth of Cook Inlet, waves 5 to 8 feet. And Wednesday, winds will become stronger out of the north and northeast, 30 knots out over the open waters of the Gulf, waves 10 to 13 feet, and 25 to 30 knots through the lower end of Cook Inlet with waves of 6 to 9 feet. On Tuesday, across the Kodiak Island, winds will be out of the northeast and north, 20 to 25 knots, waves 5 to 8 feet, and generally around 20 knots out of the east across the Alaska Peninsula, either the Bering or the North Pacific side, and waves as high as 8-9 feet off of the Pacific side there. And then on Wednesday, winds will generally be out of the northeast, 20 to 30 knots, waves 8 to 10 feet in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, and as high as 10 to 13 feet, especially south of Sand Point. Looking at the Aleutian chain, winds will be out of the east around 20-25 knots through the eastern half, increasing to 40 to 45 knot gales west of Adak through Kiska and Shimia, and highest waves will be 15 to 20 feet once you get west there of Kiska. And for Wednesday, winds will be generally out of the northeast across the central and eastern Aleutians to 30 knots, waves 10 to 13 feet on both the North Pacific and Bering sides, and north to northeast winds upwards to 35 knots around Kiska. And then on the west coast, winds will continue to be out of the north-northeast across the ice, forcing that ice to continue drifting south and westward. As I mentioned, the ice is already in the vicinity of St. Matthew, but St. Paul and St. George will see easterly winds 25 knots, waves 7 feet. And then on Wednesday, winds will be out of the north, especially across Norton Sound, south of St. Lawrence through Nunavik Island at 25 knots, 35 knot northeasterly gales vicinity of St. Matthew, as well as St. Paul and St. George, with waves around 9 feet there near St. Paul and St. George. Across the Arctic coast, winds will be southwest 10 knots ahead of a weak front and low pressure there near Utqiagvik. And the ice in place on the backside of the system, winds turn more northerly coming down through the Bering Strait, accelerating to 25 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And then for Wednesday, look for lighter winds on the Arctic coast, 5 to 10 knots, generally from the west, but more northerly winds from the northwest coast, Utqiagvik south through Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, and accelerating to 25 knots through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And overnight, early Tuesday morning, we'll have a frontal system working its way inland and stalling out through the central interior along the Yukon River. We have another weakening front that's just a trough out over the Bering, and then that front remains stationary across the southwest through northeast interior, with the next low lifting out of the North Pacific heading toward the central Gulf. That is going to spread heavier snow into the Panhandle on Wednesday, the north end of the Panhandle, under a winter storm watch Wednesday into Wednesday night. So that does it for the show. Thank you for watching on this Monday evening, and be sure to join me again tomorrow night. I'll be back.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.